My name is Hannah Carter, I'm 28 years old, and this is the story behind the title, The Day My Family Chose Instagram Over My Life. It started on a random Monday that should have been just another tired day at the office, until my body finally did what my mind had been begging for and completely shut down. One second I was staring at a spreadsheet, the next I was on the floor, cold, dizzy, and hearing someone shout my name like it was coming from underwater. While I was being rushed to the hospital, my sister's phone lit up with a message from the ER, and instead of answering, she opened her camera and smiled for a story at the park. If this story is already hitting a nerve, make sure you're subscribed and drop a like, because you're going to want to see how far this perfect family went. And before anything else, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Lying on that stiff hospital bed, I could feel the chill of the sheets seeping into my skin, mixing with the metallic smell of disinfectant and the constant beep of the monitor beside me. My throat was dry, my chest felt heavy, and my first clear thought was not about work, or money, or deadlines. It was, my parents, they must be on their way. I imagined my mom, Linda, gripping her purse with shaking hands, and my dad, Mark, arguing with the receptionist to see me faster, because that's what parents do in movies and in all those family posts they loved sharing. The nurse, whose name tag said Rachel, adjusted my IV and avoided my eyes for a second too long when I asked if anyone had called back. In that silence, something in my stomach twisted, like my body already knew a truth my mind refused to say out loud. Hours later, when the dizziness calmed down just enough for me to hold my phone, I finally unlocked the screen, expecting missed calls, worried messages, maybe even a text from my younger sister, Emily. There were a couple of work emails, a spam notification, and then a bright smiling notification from Instagram. Emily Carter added to her story for the first time in a while. My finger hovered for a moment, a part of me hoping it was some kind of supportive post about me being strong, or at least a pray for my sister message. Instead, the screen filled with sunshine, a picnic blanket, my parents and Emily all smiling under blue skies, and a caption that made my heart slam against my ribs. Family day, finally all together, except I was in a hospital bed, gasping for air in a room that smelled like fear and bleach. She hadn't just ignored the hospital call, she had replaced me. In the next slide, my mom had her arm around another woman, a girl I vaguely recognized from Emily's work, tagged with little heart emojis and the words, "Love you like a daughter." It was the exact spot where I usually stood in pictures, the right side of my mother, the favorite position that meant you were in the inner circle of the Carter family photo. My vision blurred, and for a second I told myself it was just the medication, but the pain slicing through my chest felt sharper than anything the IV could cause. In that moment, as I lay there with sticky ECG patches on my skin, I realized something brutal. I could die that day, and for them, I would be nothing more than a useful name on the bank account, not a necessary presence in the family picture. And that was the first tiny crack in the illusion I had been living in my entire life. Before that collapse, everyone loved to call me the strong one, like it was a compliment carved in gold. At every holiday dinner, my dad would raise his glass and say, "To Hannah, the rock of this family," and everyone would clap while I laughed it off and swallowed another sip of wine I didn't even want. Independent, responsible. You always handle everything, were the words wrapped around me like a shiny bow, but underneath, they felt more like handcuffs. What they really meant was, you can destroy yourself for us, and we'll call it love. I didn't realize that every time they praised my strength, they were also asking me to break a little more, as long as I broke quietly. On paper, my life looked stable and even impressive. I had a decent job at a marketing agency, paid my own bills, and somehow also paid half of everyone else's. When my mom's car needed repairs, it was my card that just covered it for now. When Emily's rent was late because she had a rough month, it was my savings that magically appeared to rescue her. At family gatherings, I was the one smiling in the Christmas photos, standing behind everyone, holding the camera timer, making sure every angle was flattering. The fridge at my parents' house was full because I'd done a quick grocery run, but the caption on my mom's Facebook would always say, "So blessed, we always have everything we need." The truth was that we usually meant Hannah pays. Inside, though, I'd been falling apart long before my body finally hit that office floor. I woke up every day with my jaw already clenched, my shoulders tight, and my mind racing through a mental checklist of who needed what from me and how fast I could deliver it. I told myself it was just a phase, that once my parents caught up on their debts or once Emily got stable, I'd finally get to rest, travel, maybe even decorate my own place the way I wanted. But every time I tried to slow down, a new emergency appeared. An unexpected bill, A sudden fight, some crisis that somehow always ended with my credit card and my emotional energy on the table. From the outside, I looked like the perfect picture of a strong, independent woman. On the inside, I was an exhausted supporting character in a movie where everyone else got to be the star. The scariest part is that I believed that role was love. When my mom hugged me and said, "I don't know what we'd do without you," my chest would swell with a warm, confused pride, as if being needed was the same as being cherished. I didn't notice that every thank you was quickly followed by another favor, another compromise, another night where I stayed up late fixing something while everyone else slept peacefully. It felt noble to be the one who could handle it, like I was somehow better for carrying more weight than everyone around me. I didn't see that I was building a tower on my own shoulders, brick by brick, pretending it was a home, until the day my knees finally gave out. And it wasn't until I woke up alone in that hospital that I realized I had been the one keeping their world standing, but no one was holding mine. The day my body finally gave up didn't start with some dramatic movie-style meltdown. It started like every other Monday, with me half awake, scrolling through emails before I'd even had coffee, convincing myself I could push through just one more week. At the office, the fluorescent lights felt harsher than usual, and my heart was beating way too fast for someone who just walked from the elevator to her desk. I remember staring at my screen, the numbers blurring together, when a wave of dizziness hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk just to stay upright. Before I continue, make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button if this already feels a little too familiar. What happens next is worse than anything I imagined from people who called themselves my family. A colleague named Jason noticed my hands shaking and asked, "Hannah, are you okay? You look really pale." I opened my mouth to answer, but the room suddenly tilted, and the next thing I knew, the carpet was rough against my cheek, and voices were echoing over me like they were underwater. Someone yelled, "Call 911," and another voice kept saying my name over and over, but my chest felt tight, like an invisible weight was pressing down, stealing every bit of air. When I finally came to, there was a bright light above me, a plastic mask on my face, and the steady, cold beep of a monitor counting the heartbeats I couldn't feel. The sound of the ambulance siren in the distance felt like a countdown, not just to the hospital, but to the end of the version of me that thought love meant never saying no. At the ER, time turned into this strange, stretchy thing. Minutes felt like hours, and every time a door opened, I expected to see my parents rushing in. When a nurse with tired eyes asked for an emergency contact, I gave her my mom's number first, then my dad's, then Emily's, trying not to sound as scared as I felt. "We'll call them right away," she said, and I clung to that sentence like a life raft. But as the IV needle slid into my arm and I listened to the monitor beep in a rhythm that sounded wrong, no familiar footsteps came down the hallway. No panicked voices argued with the staff about seeing me. Lying there, feeling my pulse slam against the plastic cuff on my arm, I kept repeating in my head, "They're coming. They're just stuck in traffic. They didn't hear the phone," because the alternative was too painful to name. When I opened my eyes again, the room was quieter, dimmer, and the chaos from earlier had melted into a dull, humming background noise. My throat burned from the oxygen mask, and my head felt heavy, like it was full of wet sand. But my first clear thought cut through everything. My parents must be here by now. I turned my head slowly toward the door, expecting to see my mom's worried face or my dad pacing the hallway. But there was no one, just the shadow of a chair no one had used. For a second, I wondered if I'd dreamed the nurse saying she'd called them, or if I was still somewhere between awake and unconscious. The silence in that room was so loud it felt physical, pressing against my ears, and it suddenly hit me that the only thing ringing was my own anxiety, not my phone. A different nurse came in to check my vitals, and I forced my voice to work. Did my parents call back? Or my sister? Anyone? She hesitated just long enough for my stomach to drop before answering. "We tried a few times, but no one picked up. I'm sure they'll get the message soon." Her words were gentle, but her eyes were already moving on to the next task, to the next patient, to the next monitor to adjust. When she left, I was alone again with the quiet buzz of the machines and the sticky feeling of ECG pads on my skin. My phone was on the little rolling table beside me, and even though my hands were trembling, I reached for it like it was the only proof I still existed outside that sterile room. Part of me hoped for a wall of missed calls, panicked texts, anything that said, "We're on our way. Hold on." Instead, my lock screen was almost empty. One text from my manager asking if I was okay, a couple of random app notifications, and then, at the top, a bright little banner from Instagram that felt like a cruel joke. It said, "Linda Carter posted for the first time in a while. with a little heart icon next to it. My chest tightened as I unlocked the phone and tapped the notification, telling myself maybe it was something about me. Maybe she was asking for prayers or giving an update. But what filled the screen wasn't worry or grief. It was sunshine. There they were, my mom, my dad, and my sister Emily, standing in a park I knew well, all smiles, dressed in coordinated colors, with trees and a picnic basket in the background. The caption read, "Family Day, finally all together," with a string of heart emojis and a quote about valuing what truly matters. And right there, tucked comfortably at my mother's side where I usually stood, was another woman, tagged and framed with the words, "Love you like a daughter." For a long time, almost everything I did for my family felt worth it, because I believed, deep down, that if something truly serious ever happened to me, they would show up without thinking twice. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the bright picnic on my screen while an IV dripped into my arm, that belief finally shattered. The pain wasn't just seeing the photo, it was understanding what it meant. They didn't cancel the park. They didn't even pause the performance. While my heart monitor kept beeping in a cold fluorescent room, their biggest concern seemed to be getting the right angle and the perfect caption. It was like watching my own place in the family get quietly erased in real time. The comments under my mom's post were full of praise, people writing things like, "Such a beautiful family," and "You guys are the definition of real love." I read those words with my hospital bracelet still digging into my wrist, feeling like I'd stepped into some twisted alternate reality. They talked about values, unity, and gratitude, while I lay there alone, waiting for someone to care that my body had literally given out. Every compliment they received for being so close felt like a slap, a reminder that I was the invisible scaffolding holding up a picture I was no longer allowed to stand in. It wasn't just neglect, it was a performance where my absence made the story look cleaner. The sharpest cut of all was realizing that my near collapse, my body screaming for help, didn't even rank high enough to interrupt their day of curated happiness. I had always told myself, if things ever got really bad, they'd be there, but now I had proof that even really bad barely registered. I wasn't a daughter to them in the way I'd imagined. I was a resource, a safety net, the quiet support that kept everything running. Useful when bills were due, when chaos needed fixing, when a crisis required money or emotional labor, but disposable when I needed something back. In that moment, the thought formed clearly for the first time. If I disappeared, they would grieve the loss of my help long before they grieved the loss of me. The funny thing about family stories is that there's almost always one person everyone calls too much, dramatic, or difficult, just because they refuse to play along with the script. In my family, that person was my Aunt Claire, my mom's younger sister, the one who never quite fit into the polished Carter image. She was the only one who actually walked through that hospital door, her hair a little messy, her jacket thrown over her arm like she'd left in a rush. When I saw her silhouette in the doorway, my chest tightened, and for a second I almost started crying from sheer relief. Before I go on, if any part of this is reminding you of that one person who showed up when no one else did, hit subscribe and leave a like. People like that deserve way more credit than they get. Claire didn't come in with dramatic gasps or over-the-top sympathy. She just pulled the chair closer to my bed, sat down, and said, "Hey, kiddo," in that casual way that somehow made everything feel safer. After a moment of quiet, she glanced at my phone still open on the Instagram post and raised an eyebrow. "So," she said softly, "Family Day, huh?" There was no cruelty in her voice, just this raw, honest sadness that matched the pit in my stomach. I tried to laugh it off, mumbling something like, "Guess they're busy," but my voice cracked halfway through, betraying me. Claire sighed, leaned forward, and tucked a piece of hair behind my ear like she used to do when I was a kid. Then she said the sentence that felt like someone finally turned the lights on in a room I'd been stumbling through in the dark. "You do see that without your money and your time, that picture wouldn't even exist, right?" Her words hit harder than any diagnosis because they named the thing I'd been too scared to admit. She started gently reminding me of all the little ways I'd been carrying everyone, paying for vacations, covering emergencies, listening to endless late-night calls, smoothing over every conflict before it spilled online. "They love the life you make possible," she added quietly. "But I'm not sure they know how to love you when you're not holding everything up." Sitting there with a hospital band on my wrist and her hand resting over mine, I realized this wasn't just a bad day or a misunderstanding. It was a system I had been feeding for years, and my collapse was the first time I'd stepped out of my assigned role. After Aunt Claire left that evening, her words kept echoing in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. For the first time, I started replaying years of conversations in a new light, especially all the times my parents proudly called me the base of this family. At birthdays, holidays, even random Sundays, my dad, Mark, loved to put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Hannah's the one who keeps everything together." And everyone would nod like it was this beautiful compliment. I used to smile, feeling a mix of pride and exhaustion, thinking it meant I was important. But lying there with tape on my arm and a bruise forming where the ivy had been, I finally understood that being the base also meant I was expected to be stepped on, silently. I remembered every time my mom, Linda, said things like, "We're so lucky you're so responsible," right after handing me another bill to help with just this once. I thought about family trips where I quietly paid for the hotel, the gas, the groceries, while they posted selfies with captions like, "So grateful for these moments." In every story they told, I was there, but not as a person with needs, just as support, the reliable background that made their lives look good. Even when I tried to talk about being tired or stressed, the response was always some version of, "You're strong, you can handle it," as if my strength was a resource they were entitled to use. It was subtle, almost invisible, which made it even more dangerous, because I'd confused being needed with being loved. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how seductive that role had been. Being the one everyone leaned on made me feel special, almost heroic, like I was the secret engine of the whole operation. But heroes in their story don't get rest. They get more work, more expectations, more praise that doubles as pressure. I wasn't really a daughter in their eyes. I was a plan B, a safety net, a fix-it person they assumed would always be there. And the moment I couldn't stand up, when I literally hit the floor at work, no one knew what to do with me, because I wasn't useful in that state. That's when it hit me hardest. I hadn't just been carrying them. I'd let them convince me that disappearing into that role was the only way to deserve a place in the family at all. When I got home from the hospital a few days later, still sore, still tired, still replaying everything, I decided, almost without planning, to do one small thing differently. I didn't rush to fix anything. I turned my phone on, saw a pile of unread messages, and for once I didn't answer right away. There were texts from my mom asking vague questions like, "How are you?" followed by the way, did you get a chance to look at that credit card bill?" There were messages from Emily about how things are tight this month, with a long explanation that slowly circled around to, "Could you maybe help me out again?" Normally, I would have gone straight into problem-solving mode, pulling up my banking app and sacrificing whatever I had planned for myself. This time, I just put the phone face down on the bed and let the discomfort sit. It didn't take long for the tone to shift. When I didn't reply within a couple of hours, the sweet concern started to crack. My mom sent a follow-up. "We're really worried about you, but it feels like you're shutting us out." My dad added, "Don't forget everything we've done for you," as if I somehow owed them an explanation for being unconscious in a hospital days earlier. Emily's texts went from, "Are you okay?" to, "You know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious," to, "It must be nice to just think about yourself for once." Every new message felt like another brick falling out of the carefully painted wall they'd built around our family image. The love they claimed to have for me started to sound more like frustration that their favorite tool was suddenly out of order. Those messages hurt. There's no pretending they didn't, but they also did something unexpected. They made things clearer. Each guilt trip, each passive-aggressive comment, each reminder of all we've done for you, revealed what had always been underneath the surface. Their main concern wasn't my health, or how close I'd come to burning out completely. It was the disruption to the system they'd grown comfortable with. For years, I'd believed we were all sacrificing together, all trying our best for each other. Now I could see that the sacrifices had been one-sided, and the moment I stopped performing, the story started to crack. It was painful to watch the castle of appearances crumble, but it was also the first time I realized that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to live inside it anymore. If there's one thing my family has always been good at, it's turning real life into a performance for other people to clap for. When I stopped answering right away and didn't rush to fix their bills, the private messages weren't enough anymore. They took the show public. My mom started posting long, tearful captions about children who distanced themselves for no reason, paired with old photos of me hugging her, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Emily shared vague quotes about being betrayed by the person you'd do anything for, and friends and distant relatives flooded the comments with sympathy. Watching it from my small, quiet apartment felt like staring at a movie where I was suddenly recast as the villain. Before I go on, if you've ever been painted as the bad guy just for setting boundaries, hit subscribe and leave a like. This part of the story might feel uncomfortably familiar. They never mentioned the hospital, of course. They never said, "Our daughter almost collapsed from stress," or We might have pushed too hard. Instead, they carefully framed it as me being cold, ungrateful, or influenced by other people, which was their favorite way of blaming Aunt Claire without saying her name. I saw comments like, "You're such good parents, sometimes kids don't see it," and "Stay strong, real love always wins," and each one made my stomach twist. In their version of the story, they were the wounded heroes doing their best, and I was the selfish daughter who had suddenly decided her family wasn't good enough. It was clever, in a cruel way. They knew exactly how to use social media to get validation, to make sure that if I ever spoke up, I'd already be fighting against a script they'd written without me. What hurt most wasn't just the lies, but how fast they weaponized my own memories. Those old photos they posted, me at 16 with braces, at 21 in my graduation robe, at 25 blowing out candles next to a cake I'd probably paid for, used to make me smile. Now they were props in a story where my pain didn't exist, only their wounded pride. The more they leaned into this narrative online, the more I understood that they didn't want reconciliation. They wanted control. They weren't asking, "How can we fix this?" They were asking, "How do we make sure everyone still thinks we're the good guys?" And as twisted as it felt, that realization gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: clarity about who I was actually dealing with. In the beginning, all I wanted was revenge. I fantasized about posting screenshots, sharing receipts, telling the whole world about the hospital, the money, the years of emotional blackmail. In my head, I wrote long, angry posts that exposed every detail, every lie behind their perfect family image. I pictured people flooding my comments with things like, "I had no idea," and "You didn't deserve this," finally seeing me as the one who had been holding everything together. The anger was loud and hot, like a fire I kept feeding just so I wouldn't have to feel the quieter, heavier grief underneath. It felt powerful to imagine destroying their carefully built mask. But lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my new apartment, I kept coming back to one stubborn thought. Even if I blew everything up online, would it actually give me peace? I imagined hitting post, watching the drama unfold, the arguments, the sides being chosen, the private messages exploding. For a while, I might feel vindicated, but I'd also still be tied to them, checking their reactions, defending myself, reliving every wound in public over and over again. It would be another performance, just in the opposite direction. I started to realize that screaming the truth at people who were committed to the lie might not set me free. It might just drag me back onto the same stage I was trying to walk away from. Slowly, my rage started to cool into something sharper and quieter: clarity. I looked at the wires that had been hooked to my body at the hospital and understood that my life couldn't revolve around proving a point to people who didn't want to see it. The real revenge, if you can even call it that, wasn't about humiliating them. It was about refusing to play the role they'd written for me ever again. Instead of asking, "How do I make them pay?" I began asking, "How do I get my life back?" That shift didn't make the hurt disappear, but it changed the direction of my energy, from burning everything down to finally building something that belonged only to me. Once that clarity settled in, the first real decision I made wasn't glamorous or dramatic. It was practical and brutal. I sat at my tiny kitchen table with my laptop open, my hands still slightly shaky, and started going through every automatic payment and extra card I'd ever set up for my family. There was the additional credit card in my mom's name, the streaming services on my account, the temporary transfer I'd been making to help Emily with her rent for over a year. One by one, I canceled them. No big speech, no warning message, just quiet clicks and confirmation emails. It felt like cutting invisible strings that had been tied around my chest for years. Before I go on, if you've ever had to be the one to say no more to people you love, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. You know how heavy and freeing that choice can be at the same time. Canceling the money was only part of it, though. The harder part was canceling the role I'd played for so long, the hero who showed up at 2 a.m., the fixer, the emotional sponge. When the next emergency text came in, this time from my dad about a bill that was unexpected and urgent, I stared at the screen for a long time. Normally, my heart would start racing, my brain already calculating what I could move around to help. Instead, I took a deep breath, typed, "I can't help with this," and hit send. My thumb hovered over the screen afterward, wanting to explain, to soften it, to apologize, but I didn't. Every instinct in me screamed that I was being cruel, selfish, ungrateful. Underneath that panic, though, was a quieter feeling I was still learning to recognize: self-respect. Their reactions were predictable and painful. My mom sent long messages about how family should always be there for each other, carefully skipping over the part where they hadn't been there for me at all. My dad called me unreasonable and said I was letting outside influences turn me against them. Emily accused me of abandoning her when she was trying her best. Each guilt-soaked sentence felt like a test, a chance to prove whether I really meant what I'd decided. Saying no didn't feel powerful or triumphant. It felt like standing barefoot on broken glass and choosing not to move. But every time I didn't cave, a small piece of my reflection came back to me. I started to see a version of Hannah who existed outside of their needs. A person, not just a solution. When the hospital finally released me, the obvious expected move would have been to go back to my parents' house to recover, slipping neatly into the old routine. That's what my mom suggested in one brief, carefully worded message. You should come stay here so we can take care of you. On the surface, it sounded loving, but I knew exactly what taking care of you meant in our family. It meant slipping right back into being useful the second I could stand up straight. So instead, I took the savings I'd been hoarding for a someday and signed a lease on a small apartment I'd bookmarked months before, but never felt allowed to choose for myself. The place wasn't perfect, peeling paint in one corner, a slightly noisy fridge, but when I unlocked that door for the first time, it felt like I was stepping into a life that finally belonged to me. From that new quiet space, I decided I was done with long emotional essays and half-explained boundaries. I wrote one single, clear message in the family group chat. I'm okay. I'm focusing on my health and my own life now. I'm not going to be the financial provider or mediator anymore. No justifications, no blame, no list of their mistakes, just the truth about what I would and wouldn't do from that point on. Within minutes, the replies started pouring in. My mom sent crying emojis and talked about everything falling apart. My dad warned me I'd regret turning my back on family. Emily tried a softer approach first, then shifted into anger when I held my ground. I read every message, let the words sting, and then put my phone down on the kitchen counter instead of sprinting in to fix the fire like I always had. For the first time, I understood that not rushing back didn't make me cruel. It made me honest. I wasn't slamming the door and locking it forever, but I was finally standing in the doorway and deciding who got to walk into my life and on what terms. Their drama, their threats, their guilt trips still hurt, but they no longer automatically dictated my actions. I made myself a simple promise. If they wanted access to me, it would have to be as Hannah the human being, not Hannah the endless resource. And as I sat on the floor of my half-furnished living room, surrounded by boxes that were actually mine, I realized something important. The distance I'd always been so afraid of didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like breathing fresh air after years of living in a crowded, windowless room. When the money stopped flowing and my name stopped appearing in their posts, the cracks in my family's perfect image turned into full-on fractures. At first, they tried to pretend nothing had changed, still posting filtered pictures, still writing long captions about staying united through hard times. But life is less forgiving offline than it is on Instagram. Bills that used to quietly disappear into my bank account started piling up on their kitchen table. The car that, miraculously, always got repaired stayed in the driveway longer. Little details began slipping into their online life. Fewer outings, fewer fancy dinners, more recycled photos from better days. It was like watching a stage set slowly lose its props. I heard some of it through relatives, some of it through things my Aunt Claire mentioned, and some of it through the tension that leaked into their messages. My dad and Emily had a huge fight about money that my mom accidentally hinted at in a voice note she didn't mean to send. There were arguments about who should step up now, as if someone else could step into the role I'd abandoned. My name came up a lot, not as Hannah, our daughter, but as Hannah, who used to help with this. Even from a distance, it was strange seeing how quickly their story unraveled once I stopped holding the ends together. It confirmed something I'd only suspected before. The chaos had always been there. I hadn't failed them by stepping back. I'd just stopped hiding the mess with my own body. Watching it all from my small apartment felt surreal. A part of me ached for them, because no matter what they'd done, they were still my family. Another part of me felt a guilty kind of relief, because the disasters I used to blame myself for were clearly happening without my involvement. I wasn't the problem. I'd just been the cover. For the first time, I could see that their version of togetherness depended on someone silently absorbing the consequences of their choices. Now that I refused to be that person, they were forced to face each other, and the truth, without a buffer. It hurt to witness, even from afar, but it also reminded me why I couldn't go back, no matter how loud the drama got. In the end, I realized the loud, explosive kind of revenge, public call-outs, shared screenshots, dramatic confrontations, would keep me tied to the same story I was trying to escape. So I chose a different kind of revenge, one that didn't look like revenge at all from the outside. Silence, distance, and consistency. I blocked where I needed to block, muted what I didn't need to see, and answered only the messages that respected the boundaries I'd already explained. When they tried to bait me with guilt or anger, I didn't bite. When they sent love wrapped around manipulation, I recognized the pattern and stepped back. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about refusing to keep losing pieces of myself just to keep their story comfortable. As the weeks turned into months, something unexpected happened. I started to actually get to know myself. I decorated my apartment the way I liked, not the way I thought would impress anyone in a photo. I cooked simple meals just for me, without worrying about stretching them to feed a crowd. I went to therapy, I slept without my phone next to my face, and I learned what it felt like to wake up without immediately checking who needed something from me. My family didn't disappear completely, but their power over my choices did. When they reached out, I weighed their words against my limits instead of their expectations. Little by little, I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could sacrifice. The real plot twist wasn't that my family fell apart without me, it was that I didn't. I didn't become cold or heartless, I became clearer. I didn't stop loving them, I just stopped loving them at my own expense. And if you're watching this and you see yourself in the invisible provider, the background extra in your own life, consider this your sign. You're allowed to step out of the picture. You're allowed to be more than the foundation everyone walks on. Your life is not just a backdrop for other people's stories. It's a script you're allowed to rewrite, even if it means some people never forgive you for putting down the pen they thought belonged to them. So, that's how the girl who almost died in an office chair became the woman who finally walked out of her own family photo. My name is Hannah Carter. And if you've watched me go from the strong one to the one who finally said, enough, you already know this isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about waking up. I used to think my collapse was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but now I see it as the moment life grabbed me by the shoulders and said, you can't keep living like this. I didn't get the apology I deserved, or the big cinematic reunion. What I got instead was something quieter and more powerful, my own life back, one boundary, and one hard decision at a time. If you recognized yourself in any part of this, always paying, always fixing, always smiling in pictures where you feel completely alone, then this video isn't just a story, it's a mirror. You are not just a provider, not just the responsible one, not just the person everyone calls when their world is on fire. You're allowed to ask who shows up when you are the one lying on the metaphorical hospital bed. You're allowed to want more than being useful. You're allowed to stop auditioning for a family role that only works if it hurts you. After hearing everything I went through, what would you have done in my place? Do you think choosing distance and quiet was the right kind of revenge, or would you have exposed everything? Here's what I've learned. Revenge that keeps you chained to the people who broke you isn't freedom. It's just another version of serving them. Real revenge, if we even want to call it that, looks a lot like healing. It's choosing peace over performance, reality over reputation, and your own sanity over their approval. So now I want to hear from you. Do you believe revenge ever truly brings peace, or does it just feed more anger? Was I wrong for what I did, or would you have drawn the line even sooner? Let me know in the comments. I read as many as I can, especially from those of you who feel like the invisible one in your own families. If this story spoke to you, if it made you feel seen or a little less alone, don't just click away and forget it happened. If you want more stories like this, about revenge, betrayal, family drama, and most importantly, taking your power back, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. Hit that like button if you think invisible providers deserve better than being cropped out of the picture they paid for. And don't miss the next video, where I'll share an even crazier story about how setting boundaries in one area of my life completely changed how I choose friends, love, and the kind of family I build from now on.